Welcome to episode 22 of The Lowdown Show. I'm Neil Graham. When you're a decent or even a better than decent rider, it's still intimidating to challenge yourself, to see how good you can be. Take this week's guest, Scott Acheson. He moved to Florida, fully embraced his midlife crisis, bought a Harley, but then he discovered dirt. In our conversation, we'll find out how the 59-year-old turned himself from a cruiser rider into someone good enough to qualify for BMW's GS Trophy Challenge, which begins in just over a week in Namibia. But before we dive in, a word from our sponsor. eBay Motors is here for the ride. With some elbow grease, fresh installs, and a whole lot of love, you transformed 100,000 miles and a body full of rust into a drive that's all your own. Brake kits, LED headlights, whatever you need, eBay Motors has it. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, it's guaranteed to fit your ride the first time, every time, or your money back. Plus, at these prices, you're burning rubber and not cash. Keep your ride alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, and of course, exclusions apply. Shall we take the plunge? Scott, let's before we jump straight to the GS Challenge, let's a little bit of your history as a motorcyclist. Now, you are in the wine business as a profession, but what's your connection to motorcycling? How did you get into it?
Easy answer. In fifth grade, so a few years ago, my dad bought me a YZ80, Yamaha YZ80, and it was that's when mini motocross bikes were coming out, and I just took to it. We ended up having a cabin up in northern Michigan that we would go to every weekend and ride. We also had a close family friend that worked for the AMA that was the starter at the Pontiac Silverdome Supercross. So I had all these connections to motorcycling, and then that's how it all started. And that's how the love affair began.
Well, Michigan really is a hotbed for motorcycling, isn't it? I mean, especially, flat track. I mean, that's the epicenter of flat track. So how come you didn't become a flat tracker? What's wrong with you?
That's a funny question, because my dad's plan originally was I was going to race. Then he started to figure out how expensive racing was and how much time it took. And he was like, no, we're good. You could ride on the trails. But back then, Neil, you could ride in the national forest as long as you had a sticker on your bike. There was no age limit. So my brother and I would go out. My toolkit was a spark plug wrench, a spark plug, and a rope. And we'd go ride and come back. And that was, the state forest was a block away from our cabin. So it was a lot of fun back then.
And have you always been, Scott, primarily an off-road rider? Are you an on-road rider? What's the scope of your experience?
So my scope is, my resume is relatively limited, I would say. I rode dirt bikes all the way through. I was in the military. And then I took a hiatus from riding, period. I didn't ride for about 10 years. Other hobbies came in. And then when I moved to Florida, I did what every, 40-some-year-old guy does, and I bought a Harley. And I rode Harleys, and one day, and then the whole adventure riding thing started coming up. Long way round, long way down. ADV-rider.com was something that we went to. And I got back into off-road dual sport riding probably about 15 years ago.
All right. So how does a guy from Michigan who goes to Florida, who rides a Harley, and of course, as we know, there are no curves in Florida. Mm-hmm. How do you end up getting on the GS Trophy Challenge in a week and a half? You're off to Namibia. How did you get the chops? Or are you just a naturally good rider?
Honestly, I don't know. No, so I bought a GS 2013. I bought a 1200 Adventure. I did my first long ride on that. I bought it in Dallas, Texas, and rode it back to Florida, which I'd never ridden a bike longer than probably 200 miles in a day. So ergonomics were not set up on the bike. My riding gear was horrible. I had frog togs that had holes in it, and but I got the bug. So I'll answer your question two ways. I kind of took to the GS pretty quickly. I started being able to ride it in places that other guys weren't riding those bikes. I'm not trying to be pompous, or it came more natural to me. And then in 2016, I saw the GS Trophy team do some stuff at the MOA, the rally up in New York. And I was like, those guys are cool. They were like cowboys. They had the right amount of dirt on their gear, but not too much. And they just, So from 2016 to 2023, I always was like, I'm going to try out for the team. I'm going to try out for the team. And a friend of mine just kind of said, when are you going to try out for the team? So I signed up, and I just practice. To put things in perspective, I have 13,000 miles on my GS and over 3,500 hours. So if you do the math, there's a lot of 4 and 5 mile an hour practicing slow speed, technical riding. And I put the work in. I mean, I'm not a naturally gifted rider. I just put a lot of work in to make the team.
You're listening to The Lowdown Show, presented by ADVrider.com and supported by ebaymotors.com. I think, your experience with the big GS mirrors mine a little bit. In fact, my first experience was with one about 15 years ago, and I was intimidated by its size until I figured out that it's actually, because of the Boxer engine, it's pretty easy to ride slowly.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if it's a center of gravity issue or if it's the way the power delivered, or some of the above, all the above. I don't know. But in your experience, what has been your key to sort of understanding slow speed stuff on such a big bike? Because I'm guessing you're fairly tall. Is that correct?
So yeah, I'm 6'3".
Okay. Well, that solves one problem right away, which is inseam.
But you don't want to put your feet down. So,
but you can.
But you know what? There's some truth to that. Yeah, for sure.
I think I'm 6 feet, so I'm not where you are, but I'm tall enough that I can flat foot pretty much everything. And I think just knowing that gives us an advantage over a lot of riders who are 5'7", who in the back of their mind, they know they can't do that. So, back to my question. What is it that's given you the confidence on such a big bike?
Well, two things happened. So about 3 years ago, I started riding trials motorcycles.
Yes.
And I started competing in trials at the local state level. And the great thing about trials is there's 6 levels at any competition, from novice up to your pro lines. And it really gave me the confidence to ride bikes slow. The other thing it did for me, Neil, is so when I went to the qualifier, people with clipboards and yellow ribbon and all those things didn't freak me out. I was used to seeing those kind of things and how to read a line, like where I need to go to get through something. So that piece of it really helped my riding the GS. And there's really no other way than just getting on your GS and practicing. And I would put cones down. If it was an 18-foot circle, the next week I made it a 17-foot circle, 16-foot, to the point where if I couldn't do it anymore, and I said to myself, I can't make this turn any sharper. If they make it a 14-foot circle, I'm out. And I would just practice and practice and practice, and the only way to get confidence on that big bike is to spend time on the big bike.
You touched on a few things there that I think are of interest. One is, one thing I've learned in motorcycling is you should never, well, I guess in life, you should never really be dismissive of something you haven't tried. And I know that. And yet I would always make fun of trials guys, going to a race, 2 miles an hour. And then, of course, I tried it. It was humiliating. And then realized what an incredible teaching tool. One of our best superbike riders here locally is a great trials rider, and I don't think the two are unrelated. It just, they really let you know at such a slow speed where your skill set is, and in terms of balance, and they're astonishing as a tool, aren't they?
Yeah, I tell people if I could do it again, I would have started riding a trials bike in 5th grade.
Yeah.
You look at some of the best, hard enduro guys. Graham Jarvis started riding trials bike. These guys. So to me, it helps you understand body length, where you're looking, because all that matters. And it just, the biggest difference to me, Neil, between obviously a trials bike and the GS is, you got to be thinking 3 moves ahead on the GS, because it's a 500 or 600 pound motorcycle versus a 140 pound motorcycle. So, your inputs take a lot longer. The bike is not as peppy or quick. It's not a 2-stroke, all those things, but it all transfers over.
I think, yeah, trials bike, in my experience, maybe yours might echo this, is that trials bike seems to know, because they're so small and so light and so intuitive, it seems to know where you're looking. So if you look in the wrong spot, it doesn't do the right thing. You can get away with it. I can go on a road race track and have my eyes in the wrong spot, and you can kind of fudge it. But a trials bike, for whatever reason, just reveals your darkest secrets, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I have a good friend of mine who's got a great riding resume. A hair scrambles guy. He's that guy, right? He said, if you want to know how bad of a rider you are, start riding a trials bike.
Yeah.
And because I think, and this is going to sound terrible, I think it sometimes is easier to go fast.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
I mean, I think you can get away with things. I mean, but when you got to go slow and you got to fit a bike through a place that it may not fit, and there's people watching you, and there's clipboards, and there's all these things. I think I'm glad I got into it. And that's one of the things I've kind of put the trials bike in mothballs while I've been training on the GS, but I'm looking forward to getting back on it. And the great thing again, Neil, at my stage of life, if you will, I can still compete against other people.
Yeah.
But the great thing about the trials, just like the trophy, I'm not competing against anybody. I'm competing against myself. How good can I ride this bike through this obstacle? Doesn't matter how good you did. Doesn't matter. I have to do the best I can do. And then that just kind of feeds and that's a great thing at this stage. Cause I'm not going to go race because I don't want to get run into by some guy that thinks he's going to be, doing the Red Bull Romaniacs. That doesn't turn me on. So.
One of my favorite quotes is from the philosopher Catullus, and I think it's around 500 BC, and he said that we are all the breakers of our own hearts. And I think that really applies to motorcycling, which is it's really not about others. It's about trying to see some sort of transformation within us in our skill set. And we really can't compare ourselves to others because we all have our own experience. We all have our own physical attributes and physical limitations. I think that's kind of what you're kind of going at there, which I agree with. But trials bikes, and I think, the big thing is once you take away the gyroscopic effect of a motorcycle, and on a trials bike, if you're, I remember this thing zigzagging up a hill, and it's quite steep, and I've got to go from this way to the other way, and then lean into the hill.
Yeah.
And the physics of that, the first few times disastrous, and then you kind of figure it out and you get it. And then the sense of accomplishment is huge. And of course you don't hurt yourself because you're standing still.
Sure.
Which is wonderful.
Which is a bonus. Yeah.
Which is
well, the other thing too, I think it really teaches you the smooth application of power and braking. And if you, and Kirk has said this many times, if you can be smooth at slow speeds on the GS, you can do some really phenomenal things. And to me, because and I just learned this the other day, and I'm going to make a t-shirt. I think a quiet bike is a controlled bike. So if you think about it, if you hear the guys that they're chasing the engine with the throttle and the clutch and the brakes, they're chopping all over the place. The guy that's doing like motor cops, when they're doing those tight, that's just humming. The motor's, they're not doing anything. It's calm, it's cool, it's quiet.
Yeah.
So I think that piece of it too really allowed me to understand and really know the friction zone, the braking, all this stuff to be super smooth on the big bike. Because that's where the big bike is not forgiving. If you're not smooth, it does the death rattle, and I call it the pa-pa. Next thing you know, you're on the ground. That's how the GS stalls. It goes pa-pa, and you're done.
Well, smoothness. If there is a secret to great riders, it's that they are smooth. I had the opportunity years ago to ride in the back of a VFR Honda with Freddie Spencer, the American former world champion, road race champion. And I remember saying at the time that it was the most inspiring and the most demoralizing thing I'd ever done, because I didn't know that a motorcycle could be operated that smoothly. Right. I didn't know it was possible to change gears and not be aware of it.
Mhm.
And then it was and of course the smoothness, you're not upsetting the motorcycle, and
Right.
it will do what you want to do. You're not, because the motorcycles, like horses, are intolerant of clumsy inputs, aren't they?
Absolutely. That's a great way to put it. And I think when you ride a GS, especially when you get to a certain level, I tell people this too. I said, for years, I rode my GS and the GS and I have an understanding. And I would talk to my bike, don't kill me and I won't kill you. Let's just do that. But you ride at a certain level that is, it's very competent, it's fun. But all of a sudden, when you get on the GS, and this is probably any motorcycle, where you are dictating what you want the bike to do, all of a sudden, all the great attributes of the bike, how the power, the braking, you name it, all of a sudden it's like in the Wizard of Oz when they went to Technicolor. You're like, this is wow. How freaking cool is this motorcycle? And that's again hours and hours and hours on the bike, but that's where I'm at with my GS. When I go out now, I don't even feel like I'm pushing the bike. I feel like it's like, here's where we're supposed to be. And the bike handles better. It's just so much more fun to ride. And all the perceived limitations of the bike are gone because the limitations were me, not that bike.
That's a really brilliant observation. And I've made this parallel, and I think listeners may have heard me say this before, so I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself. But I often think of motorcycling and music as very similar. And I think, the average level of a motorcyclist, and I don't exclude myself from this, but, if a musician practiced as much as we practice as motorcyclists, there'd be a lot of bad music. Just to play an instrument and have smooth chord changes and not to get your fingers in the right spot. I mean, there's guitarists and musicians have to practice,
Right.
and yet we as motorcyclists, and no one's ever died from playing the cello, whereas people die from motorcycles all the time, and yet we have such, we just don't do it enough. I mean, now your experience, you're doing what I should do and what a lot of us should do, which is you're taking a single bike and you're riding it kind of nonstop, aren't you, to get ready? I mean, you want to get the bike inside. You want to get inside the bike. You want the bike inside of you.
Yeah.
Has this changed your relationship with your motorcycle?
Absolutely. Again, I mean, the bike is, I talk to my bike when we're out riding. After we get through a tough section, I thank it for helping me. It's the weirdest thing, but I just feel like, that when you spend 3,000 hours on a bike in 2 years or, 2.5 years, that's a lot of time on the bike. And it's all slow speed. There's no iron butts in there. There's none of that. Yeah, my relationship with that bike, that's why people are like, well, buy the 1300, Scott. The 1300 is amazing, Neil. It's an awesome bike, but I love my 1250.
You don't want to upset, you don't want to upset the balance now, do you?
So the funny story is my 2011 GSA that I had, it took me all the way up to 2022 to sell it. And I didn't want to sell it because I didn't want to go through what I thought was going to be a whole new learning process. I trusted that bike. I knew where every strip bolt was. I knew when I got into the mud, this was going to happen. And the sand, this was going to happen. I didn't want to go through that again. But when I got my 1250, I was like, why did I wait so long? I mean, the technology just light years ahead. But, it's just, I think anything, to your point, music, golf, pickleball, you name it, you start to spend that much time and effort doing the tedious stuff, and what I mean by tedious stuff is I'll go to the church parking lot on Saturday morning at 7:00, put down cones and just do figure eights for an hour. It's not fun, but my riding, I'm a safer rider. I'm a more competent rider. I know when something's not going right on the bike, it's me, not the bike. So it's just opened a whole new world to me about what riding really could be for people. And it's kind of like, you asked me earlier, how to make the trophy. That's how I made it. I mean, I just put that much time and effort into it. If I went to get gas in the bike, Neil, I would go off to the side, put gas in. I'd go do 6 figure eights and then go home, put the bike away. But I always did something practice-wise, always. And I think people miss that. They think they're good riders, I thought it was a good rider. I wasn't. So, and I was fortunate too. This last year had some professional training at the Performance Center, and this isn't a plug for them. They're great riders, and one of the instructors had been to a trophy, and they the little things. Where are you looking, Scott? Where's your head? Where's your left knee? All those things you think don't matter, they start to matter. And you're starting to ride at a level that you got to look at that stuff. You can't get away with being sloppy.
eBay Motors is here for the ride. This week's Fireside Chat: how to get better on a motorcycle. Really simple. Go slower. And there's no better way to go slow than a trials bike. And it's self-evident, because as soon as you take away the gyroscopic effect of wheels turning, a motorcycle then has to balance through you, which is your core strength and your agility. Hopefully you have some. I don't have a whole lot of either. But irrespective of my faults, which are many, trials riding will transform whatever you ride, whether it's a street bike or a dirt bike or some combination of the two. It is an incredible way to build skills that you'll never, ever get on a full-size motorcycle. And as Scott Acheson said, if he could go back to that 5-year-old in Michigan, he'd have started off on a trials bike. Now, a word from our sponsor. With over 122 million parts, you can make sure your number one ride stays running smoothly. Brake kits, LED headlights, roof racks, bumpers, whatever your baby needs, eBay Motors has it. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, it's guaranteed to fit your ride the first time, every time, or your money back. Plus, at these prices, you're burning rubber, not cash. Keep your ride alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, and of course, exclusions apply. Now back to my conversation with Scott Acheson. You're listening to The Lowdown Show, presented by ADVrider.com and supported by ebaymotors.com. For those of us who haven't tried to become GS Trophy participants, take us through what the process was for you to become, to get where you are now. In a few days,
Okay.
September 11th, I think you go to Namibia. We'll talk about that in a minute.
Yep.
But take us through, how did you make the team?
Okay. So, fast forward till May of 2023. I knew I was a decent GS rider because all my buddies told me I was. But I didn't know if that made me the best on the playground or that made me a D1 athlete, if that makes sense to you.
Totally. Yeah.
And I knew I was pretty good. So I went up to the Performance Center up for me, and I took the GS Trophy prep class. And the reason I took it was I just wanted to know where I was. And it turned out I was better than I thought I was. But I also left there, Neil, with some skills that I didn't have yet. So that was May of 23. From May of 23 till October of 23, I rode every day minus 10 days. And that 10 days, my bike was on a trailer back and forth from Colorado. And I practiced lock-to-lock figure eights. I practiced power slides, power brake, all the stuff that we practiced at the Performance Center. At that point, the qualifier for the 2024 team was at the Performance Center in Greer, South Carolina. It was in October. The way they ran it was there was 60 male riders from around the country, 12 female riders. So for the first day and a half, you ride 20 different challenges or obstacles. Everything from the tennis ball challenge to some very
what is the tennis ball challenge?
So they have PVC pipes where let's say there's 6 of them and there's a tennis ball in every other one. You got to ride with your clutch hand, take the tennis ball off and move it to the next PVC pipe. That would be probably one of the simpler ones. Then there was other stuff that was, there's a pretty big hill at the Performance Center. You're at the bottom of the hill. You got to climb the hill and make a 90-degree turn before you fall off the backside of the hill. The challenge to it was you never knew your score. You couldn't pre-walk any sections, which in trials you can. And so you never knew where you stood versus the other 60 riders. They put you in groups of 4 to do this, so more like a golf kind of analogy. Mm-hmm. And my foursome was me and Billy, ironically, another guy, Chris Ellender, who is a great rider, came in 5th for the 2022 tryout. And another guy had been riding a GS for a year. He was just there having fun. So what happened, Neil, is at the end of the first day and a half, you have lunch, and they take it from 60 riders down to 16 riders. You're going into the semifinals. I called my wife and I said, bring my shorts and flip-flops because there's no way I made the semifinals. There's no chance. There was times I drug my bike down a hill twice because I couldn't get up it. I was just like humbled and demoralized. And so at lunch, she comes over and they announce it. And I was in 14th place going into the semis. Now the game changed a little bit. The semifinals, now there's probably 300 or 400 people watching. The semifinal run was more of a ride. It was timed, but it was all the technical stuff put together. The sand pit, we had to go through the sand pit twice. We had to climb a hill, sharp turns, the GS garage, if anybody out there knows what that is. It's a set of turns that gets decreasing as you go in. All that. And so that was the semifinals. 16 guys go into that. From 16, it goes to 6 riders for the final. At that point, I'm happy. I can go home and tell my buddies, I made the semis. Everything is good. Let's have a beer. So we sit down we go back to the tent and they announce the top 6. I'm in 4th place now going into the final.
Oh boy.
So now people are coming up to me, Neil, going, you're going to Africa, Scott. I'm like, I don't know you, and stop talking to me. Please don't look at me. Don't. Now we shift gears again. So the final is all BMW Motorrad, Germany. Every final in the world is supposed to be the same. And now I'm riding a performance center bike. So I'm riding a bike I've never ridden before. It's a 1250. But, friction zones, all that stuff is.
So up to that point, you're on your own bike.
Up to that point, I'm on my own bike.
Oh, and then they take you off your own bike at the final?
At the final. Now there's all these people watching again. It's timed, but it's all technical. There's no hills. It's all tight turns, super technical, some power slide, power brakes, those kind of things, and it's timed. So at that point, I'm in the top 6. I'm in 4th place going into it. Again, I've won. I'm happy. I can go back to my buddies in Jacksonville and we can high five. And long story short, we go to dinner. They don't announce it, but they announce the team backwards. So in 6th place was Fred Smith, and 5th place was, and then that got to 4th place and they named somebody who wasn't me. So now I'm on the team. And it was surreal. It was, I don't know. I had imposter syndrome for probably 6 months.
Yeah.
Where I was like, I'm not the best guys out there, but I was that day. I was one of the best riders there. So, and then that's how it all happened.
Before we go forward into the specific preparations prior to the trophy, which you go for next week, is there anything from your experience prepping for trophy, just your own prep and having been through the challenge to make the challenge, if you know what I mean? Is there anything you could suggest that the rest of us as riders who may not be as focused as you are, what are some of the key things in your training that you think that most of us could benefit from, and things that maybe we could do on a street bike? What do you think? What has been most beneficial? A couple of things, maybe.
So I tell people when they ask me that question, the worst thing that's going to happen if you practice, you'll be a way better rider, right? So let's simple stuff. If you go to a parking lot, two spaces are 18 feet. They're each 9 feet. If you can do a lock-to-lock figure 8 inside those 2 spaces, go practice that for a half hour twice a week. Practice and then go on the sand and practice. If you're a guy that wants to learn to ride his GS off-road, go find a piece of off-road that's 100 yards long and go practice it. And then once you get it this way, go fast, go slow. I think, and Kirk Craden said this to me, if you can ride your bike technically and not have it stall, then you're doing pretty well. I think what's underestimated, Neil, for the trophy, because it's an off-road event, is how much the on-road, what I call motor cop kind of skills feed in. It gives you a lot more confidence on your bike, because when you're leaning that bike that hard in those super tight turns, that's where you understand the application of power and where you can use braking and all those kind of things. To make the trophy, I'm a little spoiled because I live on 9 acres. So I had the opportunity. That's one of the reasons I feel like I made the team, because I could walk out there, at 1 o'clock in the afternoon and go ride for 20 minutes and just practice whatever I wanted to practice. Maybe it's brake slides, whatever it is. But I think anytime that you look at some sort of skill set that forces you to ride that big bike slow, that's going to help you. And it all bleeds over. I know people joke about it, but you're at the Starbucks and you need to turn around in the parking lot. Do it without putting your feet down. Play the ground is lava. I mean, it's the stupid games. I push a barrel around my yard. And I think that skill, people think it's a circus skill, but if you're pushing that barrel around, you're balancing, your clutch, throttle, brake, all the stuff is coming together to maneuver that barrel around the trees or whatever. So.
And motorcycles are I mean, I went to one of the, it was I think somewhere in the Black Forest in Germany. There was a GS riding school that I went 2 years ago. And we were media guys, went for a day. And there was the German supermoto champion at the time was one of the instructors. And I mean, a good rider on a GS can pretty much ride it up the downspout of your house. Yeah. They really, it is one of those bikes that and that's not the only bike, but it's certainly one of those motorcycles that pretty much, if you have the skill, you can do anything on it, which is daunting, and yet, should encourage us to try harder. Now, in preparation for Namibia, is there any, how long ago did you find out you were on the trophy team?
October of last year. So coming up on a year. We had, to answer your question, we had 11 months from the time we got almost to the day we got on the team till when we're leaving for Africa.
With this almost 12-month period, what has your training, has it changed? Are you working on anything specific? I mean, were you given any guidance on what to expect going to Namibia next week?
So a few questions there. My training, so I got injured back in January. I actually broke my ankle. And it was a complete freak thing. I was practicing some hill climbs that were nothing that you've ever, they were nothing, just one of those things. So a few injuries. My training, we got very fortunate as a team this year. We got to the Performance Center 3 different times to train. 2 days each time. The last time we were there, which was a couple weeks ago, we got to ride the new 1300s. And then one other time we got to ride the 1300s. So that piece of our training, when you're at the Performance Center, that's where they're polishing up all the little inconsistencies, where you're looking, body weight, all those things. So every time we went there, Neil, we would come back, and those were the things I would practice. And I would kind of ebb and flow depending on what I would do. I did a lot more longer rides to get used to saddle time, because these days are going to be long in Africa. But I didn't really change anything I did. I still practiced the things I practiced. I just try to get more and more consistent. If I can do this 8 times, let's do it 10 times. If I can do it 10 times, let's do it 20 times. That kind of thing, just getting very comfortable and more consistent on the bike, and, try to work on my, my physical fitness levels as best I can without getting injured. I'm not, I'm not 24. So that's a piece of it that I'm very aware of. I don't want to get busted up before, well, hopefully it doesn't happen between now and then, but I didn't want to hurt myself at all. We also got a chance to do some media stuff out in South Dakota. So we got to ride together as a team there, which was good. And that was just sheer riding, having fun.
So when you were at the Performance Center, were sort of expert riders watching you and working with you? Is that the process?
Yeah. So the way the Performance Center works, they actually helped us out a lot. They did a train with the team kind of program. So they actually comped us the time there, and then folks could come and pay their money to train with us. So we had 2 instructors, one female instructor, but she was 5-time hare scrambles national champ, motocross. The girl could ride, from Mackenzie Tricker, and a very, very good rider. Our other instructor, a guy named Chris Johns, was on the 2020 GS Trophy team for the US. So not only could he ride, but now you get a front row seat with the guy. And you can ask him all the questions versus if you're on a Zoom call for 30 minutes. So, 6 days with Chris Johns of, hey, what's it like? What's the food like? What are the bathrooms like? Can we shower? Can we make phone calls? All that stuff.
Yeah.
And he, and when they watch you, to answer your question, yeah, they're like, you guys are good riders. Let's make you better by polishing these things up. Hold your elbow up. Watch, turn your head more. Wear your eyes. Those little things that just start taking you that next level.
And I've been watched by very good riders as well, more on a road race track, but they know exactly what you're doing almost before you've done it, don't they? They're just they're so familiar with the language of riding.
Yeah.
They look at you and you think you're hiding your weaknesses, and it's like, no, they're right there. And they can see exactly where your strengths are and where your weaknesses are. And to them, it's just another day at the office, isn't it?
Yeah. And then, and they'll video you, and they'll on their phone. Mackenzie brings me over. She goes, look where you're looking. Yeah. Why? The reason you hit that cone is because you looked right at that cone. Yeah. We all know that, Neil. We all know target fixation. But I think sometimes when you start to ride, you think you're a really good rider. You're like, it works for me, not for you, kind of stuff. But it doesn't. It doesn't at all. Do as I say, not as I do, right?
It's amazing that you go where you look thing bites you in the ass every time, doesn't it?
Every time.
And
I told somebody this yesterday. So 6 days up there. I had one day at the Performance Center that I forgot how to ride a motorcycle. I could not. I ran, if you put a cone in a parking lot at the freaking Toronto Blue Jays Stadium and said,
you'd find it.
I'd run it over and then fall down. So,
But that's okay. That's an interesting point too, because I find I do this thing. I know when my riding's off, my eyes drop.
Yep.
And that to me, that's always the thing where I don't know what it is, but I to get it back, and because sometimes if you're traveling, you got to keep going. You can't stop in Lake Placid, New York for 6 days until you get your mojo back.
Right.
Or you going to Namibia,
Right.
And I find I slow and my eyes come back up. And if for some reason, if I slow down the input, I get the physical confidence back. My eyes go back up, but the eyes are, and you're right. I mean, I've tried to convince myself that, I know I'm looking at the guardrail, but I'm fine, but I'm not. I mean, they're really fundamental things, aren't they?
That's riding is the most fundamental thing out there, I think.
Yeah.
And I think when you ride with people at that level, it's like, you could shoot an 80 in golf, and you've been playing golf for 40 years, and all of a sudden they're like, do this. You're like, oh no, I can't. And I think what happens is your riding goes backwards a little bit,
yes,
but then it leaps forward. I learned that on a trials bike. I had a class with a guy, long story, but he's like, move your feet here. And I'm like, no, that's not right. That's not how you ride. And I did it. And for a week I felt terrible. And all of a sudden, boom, I'm 5 steps ahead. So yeah, it's a simple sport. It's a very easy sport. And you look where you go where you look. I mean, that's whether you're doing 100 or 3, that's how it kind of happens.
So as we've mentioned a few times, off to Namibia in a week. What are you expecting? And are you intimidated by it? I mean, you don't want to go there and stare at the cone and fall over. I mean, where are you in terms of your confidence, and in terms of, do you know what you're in for, and what are you in for?
So the first thing I'll answer it this way is like, this is an experience of a lifetime in the motorcycle industry. I think, let me rephrase that. I think it's an experience of a lifetime for an amateur rider like me, literally a wine sales guy that decided, let's try to do this, and it worked out. So I get to go to Africa with BMW to ride brand new motorcycles. Never going to happen in a million years. So I'm taking it that way, Neil. Whether we win or lose doesn't matter to me necessarily. On our special challenges, I'm going to try my hardest, ride my best I can ride. But that's going to be 6 or 10, 15 minutes of our riding day. The rest of the time, we're riding through Africa. We're going to see some amazing things and meet amazing people and ride with other teams. And so I'm really going there for the whole experience. You know, I want to meet the head chef. I want to meet the guy that's flying the helicopter around. I want to take everything in of that, because that 6 days of riding is going to be over by the time I figure out what's going on. So I want to soak it all in. And I think in the team, that's the way we're looking at it. I think if you go there, we got to win, we got to win, we got to win, you miss out on this whole awesome experience. And I think that's what BMW is really pushing, is not just who's going to win or lose, how good you do in this challenge. It's like, here's the experience of the GS rider. This is what this bike will do. And to me, that's what I'm going. So to answer your question, I'm not intimidated. I'm not worried. My confidence level is the best it's ever been. I feel like my riding is where it needs to be. I'm just kind of coasting in and you know, looking forward to Africa.
The GS Trophy, and I've been critical of motorcycle companies. Sometimes they do things that seem to make no sense to me, but the GS Trophy is kind of a brilliant thing, isn't it? Because it kind of gives good amateur riders like you this opportunity to sort of showcase your skills, to become involved in something that you're saying it's a once in a lifetime gig. I mean, riding a motorcycle in Africa, I mean, how many people do that? Very few people ever get the chance. But, you know, I mean, I remember once riding with, I was at the Erzberg Rodeo riding with, and they had a media day with Cyril Dupree, you know, five-time Dakar winner. And he can do things on a motorcycle that are just, you know, mind-blowing. But the wonderful thing is, I think, about the GS Trophy is that it gives guys like you and me a shot. We may not make it. You made it. You did the work. You had a little luck.
Yeah.
Life went in your favor, and you got it. But it's kind of great that you can, you know, any of us can give ourselves the opportunity to at least, and like you say, you practice. The worst thing, it's like going to the gym. The worst thing that's going to happen is you're going to be in better shape.
Yeah.
If you can come up with the discipline to do it. So I think that's what the GS Trophy is. It's an amazing idea, really, isn't it?
It's that's an interesting conversation, you know, because when I was having some confidence, you know, like I said, imposter syndrome kind of stuff about 6 months in, and Chris Johns, of all people, just said to me, "You're the guy. You're the guy. They don't, you know, you're the guy that can, at this stage of his life, can commit and get in shape and do all this stuff to ride a GS at this level." You know, because it's like, they don't want to see the 24-year-old guy that just, you know, can go on the supercross track. I don't think. I think, to me, the message is, you know, this is the phase of your life that you can still go after this. And because part of it too is, in the United States, you can never have held an AMA pro card. So you can never have been a pro rider at any level. You can't be a BMW employee. So it really gives guys like us, to your point, the opportunity to compete at a pretty high level and then go on this trip.
Yeah, I think that's the brilliance of it, is that, because, you know, we all know those 24-year-old riders who, you know, they can, some of them put in a lot of effort, some of them don't. Some of them, I know a young guy who's 23, and he's just incredibly gifted. He can ride anything. He can wheelie, you know, he can get on your Harley Decker and wheelie it for 6 miles.
Sure.
You know, there's no practicing. He just does it. I mean, one of those intuitive riders. But it seems those riders can really intimidate the rest of us, I think, because they have such gifts. Yes. Whereas, you know, with you, I mean, you had to work at it. You wouldn't be
Yeah.
going based on your natural skill.
Right.
You had to put in the effort, didn't you?
Yeah, for sure. And then, I mean, there's some outliers. There's guys that have made the trophy team that are that guy.
Yeah.
They're just 40 now, but they're the guy that, GS trophy. They go down, they buy on Craigslist a GS. 2 weeks later, they go make the team. And there's riders like that. We've ridden with guys like that are scary good no matter what they ride. But I think the majority of us are me and Kirk and Billy. Kirk's resume is my resume. Billy's only been riding since 2013. So we don't have this huge, we just decided to do this on the GS and it's worked out.
Let's wrap things up with a word from our sponsor. eBay Motors is here for the ride. With some elbow grease, fresh installs, and a whole lot of love, you transformed 100,000 miles and a body full of rust into a drive that's all your own. Brake kits, LED headlights, whatever you need, eBay Motors has it. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, it's guaranteed to fit your ride the first time, every time, or your money back. Plus, at these prices, you're burning rubber and not cash. Keep your ride alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. Thank you for listening to The Lowdown Show.